welcome to the deep dive. There's this staggering statistic. Over 460,000 homicides in Mexico since 2006. Just unbelievable.
It really puts the scale of the crisis into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's what we're diving into today, this really complex, often deadly mix between the cartels, the Mexican government, and how technology is shaking things up.
It's a crucial intersection.
We've gone through a stack of reports, cartel activities, government moves, the tech side of things in Mexico to, pull out the really critical stuff. So our goal here is to give you a clear picture of just how deep this cartel influence runs, how the government's responding, or, well, failing to respond sometimes.
Right.
And the surprising ways tech is being used by everyone involved.
Expect some eye-openers.
Definitely. Hopefully you'll come away with a much clearer sense of the main takeaways.
So maybe the place to start is this concept of a narco-state symbiosis.
Okay, symbiosis, like living together.
Exactly. But it's more than just criminals operating in a country. It's this deeply rooted connection, often involving actual collusion between cartel and different government levels.
So their interests actually line up sometimes.
Yeah.
They help each other out.
In many ways, yeah. It can become mutually supportive, even if it's in this completely corrupt and destructive way.
Right. So let's unpack that. The sources we looked at suggest this infiltration, it's not just random corruption here and there. It's like a strategy.
A core strategic objective, absolutely. They want to be embedded across federal, state, local government. It's fundamental to how they operate.
Why? What's the payoff for them?
Well, think about it. If you have influence inside the government, you can make sure your business runs smoothly.
Okay. Get your product to market.
Right. And maybe most importantly, you get protection. A shield against the police, against the courts.
This isn't new, though, is it? I mean, the Kiki Camarena case back in the 80s that really blew the lid off things.
It did. It showed just how far back this goes. You had the Jalisco State Police, the governor's office, even parts of the federal judicial police apparently on the Guadalajara cartel's payroll.
Wow. Decades ago.
Decades. That level of deep integration.
And if we zoom out, the PRI party, they were in power for, what, like 70 years?
Pretty much the whole 20th century, yeah. And that long rule, that centralized structure, it actually maybe unintentionally helped create these networks.
How so?
Well, under that kind of centralized control, deals could be made. Major cartels got, distribution rights, market access, even state protection.
So corruption just became normal, part of doing business.
It almost seemed like it. An investment for the cartels, really. Payoffs to ensure things ran smoothly under this sort of state umbrella.
But then the PRI lost power in 2000. Did that fix it?
Not exactly. Actually, it seems like it kicked off more violence.
More? Why?
Because those old deals, those established networks, they were disrupted. Cartels had to scramble, renegotiate their influence with all the new political players coming in, often violently.
Which explains why the 2024 elections were so brutal. The most violent in 6 years, over 30 candidates killed.
It really highlights how actively cartels are still trying to shape the political map. Assassinating candidates is a horrific way to ensure whoever wins is either friendly or too scared to interfere.
It raises a really tough question, doesn't it? About what happens when power shifts.
Absolutely. Political transitions create these power vacuums, and violence is often the tool cartels use to secure their spot in the new order.
And this is still happening now. That 2025 Texas Public Policy Foundation report, it points to current high-level collusion.
Yeah, it does. It mentions the Sinaloa cartel having considerable influence. There are allegations against General Cienfuegos, El Padrino, Dan Augusto Lopez, even a Morena governor in Veracruz allegedly helping out the Cartel del Noreste.
So it cuts across different parties, different levels.
That's the key takeaway. It suggests a systemic problem, a vulnerability that these transnational crime groups exploit, no matter who's technically in charge. The report basically says this crime wave has brought violence and corruption at all levels.
So how do they actually do it? How do they keep that grip? There's that phrase, plata o plomo.
Silver or lead, yeah. It's a brutally simple, brutally effective strategy. Two main parts.
Yeah.
Plata silver, that's the money. Using their huge drug profits to bribe officials. Anyone from the local cop on the beat right up to top politicians, judges.
What do they buy with that? Protection. Information.
All of the above. Protection from arrest, leaked info about investigations, sometimes even active help with their operations. There were even reports of cartels paying for federal police housing.
Wow, okay.
That's deep.
It shows the scale of the financial power they wield.
And it's not just cash, right? You mentioned human assets.
Yeah, that's another layer. Strategically cultivating people inside key agencies. Think customs, border protection, places where inside knowledge is crucial. So they have moles, basically, feeding them intel.
Exactly. Reliable intel. And the ability to maybe tweak processes from the inside, steer things their way. It's more subtle than just bribery.
That sounds almost harder to fight.
It is. Because it's about long-term relationships, trust. Well, corrupt trust. It gives them advance warning, lets them shape things without a big confrontation.
Okay, so that's the plata. What happens when that doesn't work? Or someone resists?
That's where Plomo lead comes in.
Violence.
Rampant violence, coercion, assassinations of public officials, journalists, political figures, anyone who gets in their way or won't play ball.
It's terrorism, basically, to enforce compliance.
It's a very clear, brutal message, a demonstration of power meant to scare everyone, not just the target. Creates this climate of fear.
And the Battle of Culiacan in 2019. That sounds like a prime example. After they arrested El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez.
A chilling example, yeah. You had something like 700 heavily armed Sinaloa guys basically swarm the city, overwhelm the authorities.
And they forced the government to release him.
They did. It wasn't just a firefight. It was the cartel dictating terms to the state in a major city. That showed a level of paramilitary power and influence that was, frankly, shocking.
It really shifted the perception of who holds the power, didn't it?
Completely. The audacity, the coordination. It showed the Sinaloa cartel could mobilize huge force and directly challenge the state's authority on their turf. A clear message.
Which leads us to the justice system, law enforcement. It sounds completely compromised. Impunity is just the norm.
It often seems that way. It's this vicious cycle. Cartel influence breeds corruption.
Which means crimes don't get punished.
Exactly. Which emboldens the cartels and their corrupt allies even more. Rinse and repeat.
And the examples are stark. El Chapo walking out of prison in 2001 because guards were bribed.
Right. Underscores the corruption right inside the system.
And state and local police, often just controlled by cartels. We're so compromised they can't do anything.
That's often the reality. And even federal investigations get undermined by leaks by corrupt insiders. It got so bad the federal police was actually dissolved in 2019.
Dissolved? Because of infiltration?
Primarily, yes. Due to organized crime infiltration, making it ineffective and untrustworthy. It's like trying to bail out a boat that's full of holes.
So it's not just a few bad apples, it's systemic.
It seems deeply embedded, yeah. Eroding the integrity of law enforcement across the board, making them unreliable, sometimes even active participants in crime.
And the wider justice system.
Yeah.
Courts, prosecutors.
Struggling, huge delays, massive caseloads, not enough resources, political meddling.
I heard they tried reforms, moving to an adversarial system.
They did. Starting around 2008, fully implemented by 2016, aimed for more transparency, better process, but the old problems persist. People can't always get good lawyers. There are still issues with coerced confessions.
And politics still plays a role.
The executive branch still holds significant sway over the justice system, which raises concerns about independence, especially in big, sensitive cases.
The impunity stats are just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Like 96 to 98% of all crimes go unpunished.
It's staggering. And for corruption cases, specifically looking at data from 98 to 2012, only about 1.75% even resulted in charges being filed.
So basically, you can get away with anything.
That's the message it sends. It emboldens criminals, both cartel members and corrupt officials. And it leads to this breakdown where people lose faith and you see these sort of parallel justice systems cropping up.
Run by whom? The cartels themselves.
Sometimes, yes. Offering their own brutal, self-serving kind of order where the official system has failed. It fundamentally undermines the state's legitimacy.
And it's not just criminals getting away. There are serious human rights concerns too, right? Abuses by the military, the National Guard.
Very serious concerns. Amnesty International and other groups report allegations of extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, committed by state forces.
And they get away with it too.
Largely, yes. Impunity is a massive problem there as well, which is deeply worrying when you have the military involved in policing without strong oversight.
It fuels this cycle of violence and distrust. Okay, so this didn't happen overnight. You mentioned the PRI era earlier. It sounds like that period, while corrupt, was maybe different, more stable?
It was a different dynamic. That term, pax mafiosa, gets used.
Mafia piece.
Sort of. It implies a period where the state, even though corrupt, kind of managed the major cartels. There were established networks, patronage, protection. Violence wasn't absent, but it was maybe more controlled, less overtly challenging to the state itself.
A corrupt equilibrium.
You could say that. Maintained through this centralized political structure.
But then 2000 happened, PRI loses power.
And that equilibrium shattered. Power vacuum, new players, cartels had to fight, often literally, to carve out their space with the new political actors.
And at the same time, the Mexican cartels themselves were changing, becoming more powerful.
Yes, that was happening concurrently. They went from basically being couriers for Colombian groups to building their own massive independent distribution networks by the early 90s.
So, more powerful cartels meeting a less stable political scene after 2000.
A recipe for conflict. The old Pax Mafiosa rules didn't apply anymore. Intense competition, violence to forge new deals.
Then President Calderon declared his war on drugs in 2006. Sent in the military, went after the leaders. How did that play out?
Well, the intention was clear, weaken the cartels. But the result was often counterproductive.
How?
Taking out the top leaders, the kingpin strategy often didn't destroy the organization. It just created power vacuums within the cartels.
Leading to fights over who takes over.
Exactly, violent succession struggles. And it often caused the bigger cartels to break apart into smaller, more numerous factions.
The Hydra effect you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. Cut off one head, two grow back, and these smaller groups were often even more violent. Fighting each other for turf and control made the whole landscape more chaotic.
Which brings us pretty much up to date. This fragmented landscape, hundreds of groups, but dominated by Sinaloa and CJNG fighting these brutal proxy wars.
That's largely the picture now, yes.
Yeah.
Extremely complex. And if you look at Table 1 in the source materials, it really maps out this complexity that the major players, their leaders, where they operate, what they do, their tactics, it's a tangled web.
It really underscores that it's not just one cartel problem.
Far from it. It's a multitude of different criminal enterprises, which makes finding solutions incredibly difficult. Requires very tailored approaches.
So the government is trying to push back, trying to control things like the police, the press. But it sounds like they're fighting with one hand tied behind their back because of the corruption.
That's a good way to put it. There are efforts, definitely. But they keep running into the same walls, the deep-seated corruption, the power of the cartels already inside the system. The state's own tools are often compromised.
Let's talk about policing. You've got federal, state, local levels. All seem compromised to some degree.
Yes, the multi-jurisdictional nature makes it complicated, and corruption has weakened trust and effectiveness at all levels.
And the main response seems to be more military. Since Calderon, and continuing now with the Army, Navy, and the National Guard.
That has been the trend, yes. The National Guard was created in 2019, actually absorbing elements of the dissolved federal police, and it falls under military Sedena management.
But has it worked? Has militarization improved security?
The evidence suggests not really, not in the long term. Public security hasn't fundamentally improved in many areas, and as we mentioned, it comes with this huge downside of human rights allegations, extrajudicial killings, disappearances, torture, often with little accountability.
So it's a trade-off, but maybe not a good one.
It's a serious dilemma. It hasn't solved the core security issues and has created significant new problems regarding human rights and public trust, and it doesn't fix the corruption in civilian police forces.
And all the reorganizations of federal police. There's at least 5 since the 80s. Creating and dissolving elite units, that sounds chaotic.
It is disruptive. It leads to loss of expertise, institutional memory, it damages public confidence. And frankly, every time there's a big shakeup, it potentially creates new openings for cartels to infiltrate during the transition.
Just seems like a constant struggle to build something effective and clean.
It does. And it hinders the development of a truly capable, trustworthy national police force.
And all this is happening against the backdrop of the justice system issues we already talked about. Poor legal help, coerced confessions, political influence makes the police's job even harder.
Absolutely. If arrests don't stick because the justice system is flawed or corrupt, it completely undermines law enforcement efforts. It fuels that impunity cycle.
Okay, what about the press? The watchdog role. It sounds incredibly dangerous to be a journalist in Mexico.
Extremely dangerous. Consistently ranked one of the most hazardous places globally for journalists. They're caught in a vice, really.
Between who?
Between cartel violence retaliation for stories they don't like and pressure from the government itself trying to control the narrative.
Creates a chilling effect, I imagine.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Leads to self-censorship, limits the public's right to know what's really going on with crime and corruption.
The cartel violence against journalists.
Yeah.
It's targeted. It silenced them.
Often, yes. Direct retribution for unfavorable reporting. That statistic, 67 journalists killed in 2022 alone. It's horrific.
Just for doing their job.
It starkly shows the risks. Cartels know information is power, and they try to shut down anything that threatens them.
The government set up a protection mechanism, right? For journalists and human rights defenders.
They did. The mechanism for the protection of human rights defenders and journalists?
But at work.
Well, the fact that 8 journalists who were enrolled in the program were killed over 7 years raises serious questions about its effectiveness.
But even being officially protected isn't enough.
Apparently not always. And what's really disturbing is the mechanism's own data shows public officials are responsible for almost half the attacks against journalists.
Wait, state officials attacking journalists?
Responsible for nearly half the aggressions recorded by the mechanism. It suggests elements within the state itself are part of the threat, or at least failing massively to hold attackers accountable.
That's deeply troubling.
It points to a failure to protect and possibly complicity.
And now there are these legislative moves, like that April 2025 bill, fines for foreign political propaganda, more power to the Interior Ministry, giving the Digital Transformation Agency control over spectrum. Media execs are worried.
Very worried. They see it as an attempt to control media content, stifle criticism, and consolidate government control over information.
How could that help cartels?
Indirectly. By weakening the independent press, the watchdog function, you reduce scrutiny. And in a corrupt environment, centralized control over things like broadcast licenses could potentially be exploited by those looking to influence coverage, whether state actors or criminal groups benefiting from less transparency.
And the relationship between the last president, AMLO, and the press was pretty bad, right? Publicly attacking journalists, leaking personal data.
It was very strained. That kind of rhetoric, that public denigration, polarizes the discussion and damages trust in the media overall.
Which, again, probably helps those who prefer to operate in the shadows.
When trust in credible media erodes, it's harder for the public to know what's true. It creates space for disinformation, which benefits those avoiding accountability.
This influence, it's not just police and press, though. It seeps into other areas, too. Regulatory bodies, civil society.
It makes sense strategically for them to try. Think about agencies overseeing finance for money laundering, environment for illegal logging or mining, commerce, transportation to move goods and people.
Anywhere they can smooth the path for their operations.
Exactly. Control resources, avoid regulations, maximize profit. Regulatory bodies are prime targets because they hold the keys. They can either block or facilitate illegal activities. Co-opting officials there gives cartels a huge advantage.
So those government moves we just talked about, centralizing power, like giving the ATD control over spectrum concessions, that could actually make things worse, create bigger targets for corruption.
That's the risk. Concentrating power without strong checks and balances, especially where corruption is already an issue, can create vulnerabilities. These powerful bodies become very attractive targets for groups wanting to manipulate the system.
And weakening independent watchdogs, like INAI, the Transparency Institute, that also fits this pattern.
Yes, weakening autonomous oversight reduces independent scrutiny. It makes it easier for corrupt state elements and criminal groups to operate without being exposed. It serves both the state that might want less oversight and criminals who thrive when things are opaque.
It's like they benefit from the same conditions, less transparency, less accountability.
Precisely. An environment where independent checks are weak is advantageous for anyone trying to avoid scrutiny.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Technology. This seems like a whole new front in the conflict.
It absolutely is. The digital realm is increasingly vital for communication, intelligence, even attacks, both for the cartels and the state, and among the cartels themselves.
We tend to think of cartels maybe as low-tech, just guns and trucks, but that's wrong, isn't it?
Completely wrong. They are surprisingly resourceful and quick to adopt and adapt advanced tech.
Like their own communication networks. Well, Zetas pioneered that.
They did. Building clandestine radio and cellular networks specifically to get around government surveillance.
How sophisticated are we talking?
Pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
Using modified commercial tech like GSM, but running it on things like software-defined radio platforms, using advanced techniques to scramble signals, hop frequencies rapidly, and strong encryption.
So like their own secret encrypted cell network?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Using modified standard encryption like A53, but also stronger stuff like AES-256, even custom methods, sometimes tied to location, geolock, so the key only works in a specific area.
Wow. And is this expensive, specialized gear?
It used to be, but the cost of things like software-defined radio has plummeted. It's democratized access to quite sophisticated technology.
Okay, so secure comms. What else? Cyber stuff? Hacking.
Definitely. They use hacking to gather intel on police operations, on rival gangs, and they're tapping into the whole cybercrime as a service market.
Buying malware off the shelf.
Buying malware, hiring people for doxing attacks, getting surveillance software, using it to break into institutions, steal data, even compromise ATMs, and they operate on dark web markets using crypto.
So they're plugged into the global cybercrime economy.
Increasingly so, yes.
And drones. We hear about them using drones for surveillance, right? It's watching the army, the police.
That's common, but the really worrying development is weaponizing them.
How?
Groups like CJNG have been modifying commercially available drones, the kind you can buy online, to carry and drop explosives, IEDs, basically.
Flying bombs.
Exactly. It gives them a cheap, accessible airstrike capability. And they adapt this off-the-shelf tech so fast, the state often struggles to keep up with countermeasures.
That's terrifying. Okay, what about social media? How does that fit in?
It's become a massive tool for them. Platforms like TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, they're using them for propaganda recruitment and psychological warfare.
Weaponizing social media.
Absolutely.
How does the recruitment work? Just posting job ads?
It's often disguised like that, yeah. But it's very slick. Using colloquial language, popular music, slang, hashtags, coded emojis, things that appeal to young people.
What are they offering?
Promises of money, status, guns, girls, a place to belong, accommodation, even training. It lures in vulnerable people, often minors, into roles like lookouts, smugglers, sicarios, even sex trafficking.
It works.
Reports suggest a significant percentage of cartel-linked accounts are actively trying to recruit. It's a real pipeline.
And propaganda, what are they pushing?
Building their brand, showing off their firepower, convoys of trucks, weapons, but also trying to look benevolent sometimes, handing out aid packages with their logo during COVID or after disasters, playing narco-corridos, praising their exploits.
Using those coded emojis you mentioned. Like what, a ninja means hitman?
Yeah, things like that. Ninja for Sicario, pizza slice for Chipizza linked to Sinaloa. A rooster often represents CJNG. It creates this kind of in-group language online.
And the psychological warfare part? That sounds dark.
It is. Deliberately spreading extremely violent content. Executions, torture, beheadings. To terrify rivals, intimidate security forces, scare off informants, assert their dominance. Pure psychological terror.
So it's all part of building this narco culture, making the cartel life seem normal, even attractive.
Exactly. Creating this counter-narrative where the cartel world is presented as a viable, maybe even aspirational alternative, especially for kids with few other options. It's a long game trying to normalize criminality, win hearts and minds in a twisted way, and undermine the rule of law.
A battle for legitimacy, almost.
It's a kind of cultural insurgency, yeah. Trying to create parallel social structures.
Faced with all this tech use by cartels, what's the government doing? How are they fighting back in the cyber realm?
Well, the picture seems fragmented. Efforts exist, but they often lack consistent priority, funding, and face huge implementation challenges. And of course, corruption undermines everything.
They have strategies, though. Plans on paper.
There's a national cybersecurity strategy from 2017, had a vision, work streams. But reports suggest it wasn't really prioritized under the last administration.
And newer proposals.
There was a national cybersecurity bill proposed in April 2023. Talked about a new national cybersecurity agency, specialized cybercrime prosecutors, judges, powers to take down websites. President Sheinbaum has also talked about wanting a national intelligence system.
But are these things happening? Are they effective?
It's unclear how effective they'll be in practice, and other actions won't be working against it.
Like what?
Like the weakening of independent regulators we discussed. The Federal Telecommunications Institute, IFT, had budget cuts, commissioners weren't replaced. That undermines civilian oversight that's actually crucial for cybersecurity, and it can stifle private sector innovation too.
So one step forward, maybe one step back.
It can seem that way. Plus, Mexico's own critical infrastructure is reportedly quite vulnerable to begin with, exploited by both domestic criminals and foreign actors.
And always the corruption issue.
Always. Systemic corruption and the sheer power of the cartels can derail even the best-laid plans and strategies.
Is there international help?
There is some. The U.S. DoD works with the Mexican military on cyber and counter-drone tech. The UN provides drug ID technology. Mexico's expected to ratify the UN Cybercrime Convention.
But is it enough to keep pace?
That's the core problem. Cartels adapt tech so quickly. State responses tend to be slower, more bureaucratic, hampered by politics and corruption. Without sustained whale resources and serious anti-corruption efforts, the state response often feels reactive and insufficient.
Table 2 in the sources kind of sums this up, right? The evolution of tech use, government counters, highlights the gap.
Yes, Table 2 provides a good overview of that asymmetry. Cartels are agile, the state struggles to keep up. It's a major challenge in this digital battlefield.
So all of this, the corruption, the violence, the tech battle, what's the impact on ordinary people in Mexico? It sounds devastating.
It is. The human toll is immense. Escalating violence, those horrifying homicide numbers, the disappearances. It's like a nation under siege.
That 460,000 plus homicide figure since 2006. And the violence isn't just shootings, right? It's brutal.
Extremely brutal. Targeted killings, bombings, ambushes, massacres. And the gruesome displays, mutilated bodies left in public, that's pure intimidation. A sustained level of violence that's hard to comprehend.
And the disappearances. Over 120,000 officially missing since the 60s.
Officially. Many believe the real number is much higher. And there's criticism that the government has tried to downplay the numbers with a recent census.
And the families searching. The buscadoras. Mostly mothers.
Yes, and they face incredible risks themselves. Threats, attacks, some have even been disappeared or murdered just for searching for their loved ones.
That's heartbreaking. The Isaba case, the 43 students in 2014, that became a symbol, didn't it?
A terrible symbol of the crisis, yeah. Allegations of local police working with criminal groups, and the government's handling, refusing to release key military documents, just fueled suspicions of state complicity. The trauma is immense.
So it's not just the violence itself, it's the lack of answers, the lack of justice.
Exactly. It destabilizes communities, erodes trust completely.
And that erosion of the social fabric, it goes beyond disappearances.
Oh, yes. You see huge internal displacement, people fleeing violence. Estimates were around 392,000 internally displaced by the end of 2023, probably higher. Parts of Chiapas are badly affected by clashes between CJNG and Sinaloa.
Creates a climate of fear.
Pervasive fear. Polls going back years showed 70% feeling unsafe. It changes how people live, where they go, what they do.
And trust in the government and institutions.
Historically low and getting worse because of the insecurity and corruption. Surveys show maybe only half trust the federal government, even less for state or local. People don't even report crimes, maybe only 15% do because they don't trust the authorities.
How can you govern a country like that?
That makes it incredibly difficult, hinders everything.
And politics is getting more polarized.
Seems so. Fueled by inequality, corruption, the violence around elections, the government media antagonism we talked about. One global survey found 52% of Mexicans felt the country was very divided and didn't think they could overcome it.
And that division, it probably helps the cartels.
It makes a unified response much harder. A fractured, mistrustful society is easier for organized crime to operate in.
And human rights overall, just in crisis.
It's often described that way. Systematic violations by both cartels and state forces, usually with impunity.
Human rights defenders, journalists, still being targeted.
Constantly. Criminalized, harassed, threatened, killed, at least 9 defenders murdered in 2024. Environmental activists are particularly vulnerable, 15 killed in 2023.
And the state security forces, military, National Guard, still facing abuse allegations?
Credible allegations continue. Arbitrary detention, torture, disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and still very little accountability.
The protection mechanism we mentioned earlier, clearly not enough.
No. Beneficiaries are still intact, and public officials remain major perpetrators of threats.
And now worries about the courts. Changes to how judges are selected, limiting judicial review.
Yes, concerns about constitutional amendments potentially allowing popular election of judges, which could politicize the judiciary. Changes to things like amparo protections or amnesty laws are criticized for potentially expanding executive power and limiting checks and balances, possibly making impunity even worse.
It's a bleak picture on the human rights front.
Extremely concerning.
And woven through all this is that narco-culture phenomenon. Normalizing, even glorifying cartels.
Yes, especially among young people. It's a complex sociocultural thing.
Like the Narco-Corridos, the songs praising traffickers.
That's a big part of it. They challenge the official story, challenge state authority in a way.
And cartels sometimes try to act like Robin Hoods, providing things in poor communities.
Sometimes, yes. Providing security, jobs, even their own form of justice where the state is absent or corrupt. Handing out aid after disasters, funding local projects like churches or sports fields.
Trying to buy loyalty.
Cultivating loyalty, creating dependency. It's a form of soft power.
And using social media to push this image.
Absolutely. Strategically using TikTok, etc., reaching young people with engaging content, music, slang, images of wealth, guns, camaraderie, building this online identity, offering belonging.
Presenting the cartel life as a real, maybe even desirable alternative.
That's the aim. Legitimize the lifestyle, attract recruits. Especially appealing where legitimate opportunities are scarce.
Even mixing with religion, like Santa Muerte.
There's some syncretism, yeah. Reinterpreting folk figures to offer a kind of spiritual okay for illicit activities. Deepens the psychosocial hold.
So narco-culture isn't just music and fashion. It's a real challenge to the state.
It's a sophisticated challenge. It's trying to build parallel social structures, influence culture, compete for legitimacy. This societal split makes it much harder to build a unified nation based on rule of law.
Table 3 in the sources pulls a lot of this together, right? The stats on homicides, disappearances, displacement, trust, corruption costs.
Yes, Table 3 gives you the hard data, the empirical evidence behind these devastating social and human impacts. Really paints a stark picture of the crisis.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the money. The economics of all this. It's not just drugs, is it?
Not by a long shot. Drug trafficking is still core cocaine, fentanyl, meth heading north, but they've diversified hugely.
Into what?
Extortion, kidnapping for ransom, human smuggling, massive oil theft, huachicol, illegal mining, you name it.
A whole shadow economy.
Exactly. And they dominate the drug trade still. But extortion is huge and growing, demanding payments from businesses, even down to avocado and lime farmers. A criminal tax.
Human smuggling, too. Is that big money?
Massive. Some reports suggest it might even rival drug trafficking revenues now.
And oil theft. Huachicol.
Cost Pemex, the state oil company, billions every year. Then there's illegal mining, kidnapping, and sophisticated money laundering, of course.
Sinaloa is into all of this.
Pretty much the full spectrum, yes. And it's not just them. One study in 2022 identified over 440 distinct criminal groups.
440, wow.
That fragmentation increases competition, pushes groups into more diverse illicit activities. It's also a risk strategy for them, and it embeds them even deeper into local economies.
And what does this do to the legitimate economy? To businesses' investment?
Creates a really hostile environment, deters investment, both local and foreign.
Because of the extortion, the criminal tax.
That's a big part. Businesses forced to pay protection money. One survey found 12% of companies reported cartels controlling their sales, distribution, or pricing.
12%?
Yeah. Then there are the indirect costs, spending fortunes on private security, higher insurance, supply chains getting disrupted.
And the overall cost of violence and corruption to the economy.
Estimated to be huge. One estimate put the cost of violence at over 20% of GDP back in 2017. Corruption costs maybe 10% of GDP annually. That's money not going into productive investment.
So it just drags the whole economy down.
Absolutely. GDP growth is forecast to be pretty low in 2025, well below potential, partly because of these security and institutional problems. Plus, concerns about judicial reform scaring off investors, political uncertainty. It undermines development, limits opportunities, makes the illicit economy look more attractive.
And they have to launder all that illicit money, right?
Yeah.
Get it into the formal economy.
Crucial step for them. Makes the dirty money usable, hides its origin.
How do they do it? Is it sophisticated?
Has to be, given the vast sums. Complex schemes, often crossing borders, using multiple sectors. Investing in legitimate businesses is common.
Like what kind of businesses?
Real estate, tourism, agriculture, transportation, retail. Anywhere they can mix dirty money with clean revenue.
And the general chaos and corruption helps.
Definitely creates an environment where it's easier to hide things. Even within official economic bodies, potentially. Illegal mining is another channel.
Sinaloa does this too.
Oh, yes. Heavily involved in money laundering.
And new tech. Crypto.
Yeah. We're seeing that too. Cyber cartels using cryptocurrencies on dark web markets. Similar to how some Asian crime groups use online gambling and virtual assets.
So the dirty money gets woven right into the real economy.
Deeply intertwined. Which makes fighting the cartels even harder. How do you surgically remove the criminal elements without damaging the legitimate businesses they've infiltrated? Needs really strong anti-money laundering efforts, international cooperation.
So overall, this whole shadow economy, It's like a parasite.
A good analogy. It enriches a few, but it drains the lifeblood from the overall economy, hinders development.
And it creates this vicious cycle. The conditions that let cartels thrive, corruption, inequality, weak government, they get worse because the cartels are there.
Exactly. They exacerbate the problems that allowed them in. The illicit drug market has huge negative impacts: crime, migration, lower GDP.
And the opportunity cost. All that money lost to violence and corruption.
Massive. Could be
Yeah.
invested in schools, hospitals, infrastructure, things that would actually help people.
So the instability, the turmoil, it just holds Mexico back economically.
Consistently, GDP growth stays below potential. Investment is cautious. Remittances might drop. The narco economy fundamentally undermines the foundations of a healthy, fair economy, perpetuates poverty, makes crime seem like the only way out for some.
Okay. So pulling this all together, it's clear cartels are incredibly deeply embedded in government structures. The state's response is hampered by corruption, lagging technology, immense challenges, and the impact on society, on the economy.
Yeah.
Just devastating.
It's an incredibly complex, deeply concerning picture. The entanglement is profound.
This deep dive hopefully has clarified some of the core dynamics, but it really leaves a big question hanging for you, the listener, to think about. Given how entrenched this narco-state situation seems, all the factors we've talked about, what are the long-term implications for Mexico? And, maybe more pointedly, can just focusing on security, more police, more military, ever really work on its own?
Right, without tackling the roots.
Exactly. Without addressing the underlying poverty, inequality, corruption, the weak institutions that allow these groups to flourish in the first place. It makes you think about the ethics, the geopolitics, the spillover effects. Are there any real paths to lasting solutions here?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? Can you treat the symptoms without addressing the disease? A truly sustainable approach likely has to go much deeper, addressing those root causes of why cartels gain power and legitimacy in the first place.
Something to definitely keep thinking about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you a clearer, if maybe sobering view of this incredibly critical issue.